Hello, everybody who might be joining us live. My name is Sawyer. I'm one of the co-founders of Virtual College Counselors, and I am here with Ronald Ly, also known as Renanthra,
That's right,
as
yeah.
his screen name. Ronald, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Sawyer. Man, you really turned it on. That was fantastic. I feel like I'm a celebrity on stage or
Oh,
something.
awesome. Well, maybe one day we will reunite on the interview stage in front of thousands of people, and you'll have the crowd to also meet your celebrity status.
Oh, that's the dream. Being back on stage.
Well, everybody, I appreciate you joining us, whether it's live or whether it's later on YouTube. Why are we doing an esports interview series? That's a question I get a lot, and truthfully, there's a few reasons. But the main reason being is that working with students throughout the college application process and throughout the high school process, a lot of them are very passionate about video games. Sometimes it's about the narrative, sometimes it's about the community, sometimes it's about the competition. But a question that often comes up a lot is how can they take those passions and engage with them in meaningful ways? And kind of the first thing on that list when we think of maybe buzzwords on like the college level would be esports. And so for that, we have Ronald here, who's the assistant director of the esports program at the University of California, Irvine. Ronald, can you just introduce yourself real quick? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do at the University of California.
Sure. Yeah. Well, as the assistant director, I think in esports especially, a lot of people might be like, okay, well, what does that entail? But I guess in short, my job is basically to oversee the UCI esports program. That includes all our supervisors, our coaches, and our interns. It means I work very closely with our athletes and staff to ensure that our teams and departments have all the resources that might need to succeed. Beyond that, it's things you might expect from a person working at athletics. So I build a lot on our program's culture. I provide administrative office support. I coordinate events. I track timelines. I action feedback. So a lot of the bureaucratic things you might expect.
Right.
So TLDR, too long didn't read. That's a lot of words to say that I keep the lights on and I make sure they burn as bright as they can.
Awesome. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for that. We thank the people in the backstage, the people behind the curtain, so to speak. I did notice that I forgot to unmute for that first part. So really quickly, for those of you who watched us talk in silent, we got everything Ronald said, luckily. But to reintroduce, once again, my name is Sawyer. I'm co-founder of Virtual College Counselors. We're doing an esport interview series specifically because there are a lot of high school students who love video games, and they love them for the community, for the competitiveness, or they love them for the story, the narrative, the art. But when we talk about how they can get involved in an academic level, esports is kind of the first thing that comes to a lot of their minds. And so Ronald Ly is here today with us. Screen name is, and we'll see if I can pronounce it correct the second time, Renanthra.
Nailed it.
And we are going to talk a little bit about esports, a little bit about the University of California system, and a little bit about Ronald's story. So, Ronald, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in esports? Like the quick, short version of how did you get involved in video games and esports and end up where you are right now?
Yeah, I mean, for 30 minutes, I'm gonna have to really blitz through it. I don't think many people working in esports have had a very clean path. You know, esports is a brand new thing, and there's not a linear kind of step-by-step process to get from how do I, I want to play to being not even assistant director, like even just having a conversation with a school's director or something.
Right.
I am young. I'm a young guy. I'm turning 27 in April. So I am a baby by academic standards here at the university. I got my start originally as a player, like a lot of people watching this might, as students. People fall in games because they are fun, they're escape tools, they're, for whatever your reason might be. I think at some point, every student's like, I want to do this for the rest of my life.
Right.
For me, that was, I wanted to play. I wanted to, I grew up at the right time where esports was just blossoming and there were pros and stuff that were competing in League of Legends.
Right.
I played that. I was pretty good at that, but never quite good enough. And then Overwatch came out. That's a game that's, it's for those that don't know, it's basically a tactical arcade-like shooter with fantasy sci-fi elements. I played that while I was in school, not on a team, just as a club event. Went to a couple of tournaments, and over time, I decided to transition out of playing, growing up, having to, make ends meet and stuff. This is a great story. I actually, in practicing for our collegiate events and things like that in downtown Toronto, we went to a small time esports bar. And at that bar, me and Sawyer were talking before the show about StarCraft. Legendary figure Huck, Chris Laranger, who you
really?
He's from Toronto. And he, at the time, was also kind of getting a start in Overwatch and things like that, had his own team. Unbeknownst to me and my college teammates, we went to the same bar as they did for that event. It was like a small pot, maybe $600, not a ton, $100 per person. But yeah, we've played, and the tournament was as grassroots as it gets. Like half the people were Xbox players, and it's kind of like a PC professional scene. So we ended up meeting in finals, and by the skin of our teeth, we actually won.
Wow, so, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and that's kind of where I got my start. Just almost miraculously, Huck talked to us after we got a couple of drinks. He said, "Okay, so who are you guys? Like, you're really good. Tell me about yourselves." And by then, I was just graduating, so we got to talking a little bit, and he offered me like an assistant coach position.
Right.
One thing led to another, and over years of kind of learning more about the game, getting more comfortable in my own skin, I became a head coach for a few teams, represented Team Canada at one point, and then moved away from kind of professional semi-pro to college, back to education, because I graduated with a major in philosophy, or specialist in philosophy at U of T. I wanted to be a teacher, so I thought it was, again, the best way to kind of marry my skills and what I'm passionate about, working with kids and video games. So guys, kind of full circle, now we're here in this interview.
No, that's awesome. And what amazing, it always strikes me, something we try and tell our students pretty frequently, and it's not very reassuring to students at the time, but anybody who's kind of had at least a couple years under their belt, like, you just never know what doors are going to appear, like who's going to be there. One of my favorite college professors only ended up being a college professor at the university I went to because he sat next to our president on an airplane. And the luggage got stuck in the conveyor belt, and so they were just there for like an hour waiting for their luggage. And finally the guy popped the question. He was like, "Hey, if you ever need like a global like study abroad programs guy, like I'd love to work there." And then like a year later the position opened up, and that's how he ended up getting there. So a real life example of what I tell our students all the time.
Life will find a way.
It will. Life will find a way. It's also funny, there's a side tangent. I won't go on to too many of these because we have precious minutes. But I owe a great debt to the Canadians, our neighbors up north, because I originally, we were talking about this before the stream, fell in love with esports through StarCraft. And for the most part, most North American professionals are way better than I will ever be, but not good enough to maybe compete on the global stage in general. And so there were a couple Canadian players, being one of them, that just, whenever all the Americans would fall out, I'd be like, all right, I'm a North American now, like, let's go. But
move the border a little
bit. That's
bit.
Exactly. Literally move the goalpost just a little. Fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing that. It's always nice to hear a story of how someone actually ended up where they are, because a lot of students will see where someone is and they think, man, I want to get there, but they have no clue what steps to take. And so I want to take a step back, because you mentioned a lot of the things you were doing in your program. One of the things you talked about was the culture of a team, which is something that I talk with students about a lot, is culture of school, a culture of students, like all sorts of things that just kind of exist around you, and how it helps kind of shape you, and also how you help shape it. So can you talk a little bit about like the esports culture that you work with in your program?
Yeah, sure. So I'm very fond of where I work now, the University of California, Irvine, because I've been fortunate enough to work within professional infrastructures. And the goal between a professional esports organization and a collegiate one are vastly different. Obviously, as a professional organization, you're trying to appease sponsors. Your main goal is competition, is to win. And because that is the kind of prime directive, culture will reflect that, right? But when you're working in a collegiate setting, turnover obviously cannot be as high. Oftentimes you're just working with the pool of the students that are already at the school itself. And not every institution has the tools to recruit aggressively, or offer scholarships even. Most schools do not, in fact, the vast majority do not. So what will keep you competitive is, well, the resources you give them, how you treat them, and what's life like away from home. So at UCI, we care a lot about our students. We try to make sure, and we haven't failed thus far, but pretty much everyone that goes through our doors has to have a plan. And we talked about this pretty extensively with everyone that gets brought on board as a player or staff or what have you. But what are you looking to get out of working with us? And tell us about your passions, where you see yourself later on. Getting a degree is the most important thing to us, not just winning. And being a good player means, to us, being a good person. We're stuck with you for 4 years, maybe more. So it really doesn't fly if you're not. And a large part of our job is to, we vet everyone coming through. We talk honestly and earnestly about aspirations. Do they want to go pro after this? Is that realistic for them? Or are you just kind of like, esports is a big thing, you're good at it, you kind of want to live that life without regrets, and then where do you go after? We having that dialogue and that understanding goes a long way. Obviously, you have the things you might expect in regular athletics. You have to be honest a lot of the time. Like, it's performance based, and sometimes that's tricky to navigate. But we have solid coaches here with professional experience. We have staff psychologists on hand for more of the like the fires you have to put out for that sort of thing. We equip them with as much as we can to make sure that they have a solid foundation.
It's interesting because, as you say that, and for those who don't know, my background is in college admissions, so working on the side of applications, interviews, scholarships, stuff like that. A lot of what you're saying, truthfully, echoes a lot of my experience in admissions, where like we are kind of the touch points for a lot of the college interactions, and a lot of our job, I talk with students about this a lot. Certainly when we're reviewing applications, like GPA, test score, that's all really important. But like we are also looking for like culture and community. And that is really important. And a lot of times that will move the needle in a lot of ways that like maybe students don't think. And so it's the same thing where, like you said, like if I recruit you, I'm stuck with you for 4 years too. Like, and you might be a student worker in our office, you might be out representing the community or the college in some way, shape, or form. But like, we want to make sure that there is that culture that matches the identity of the school and what other students are bringing in there, or adds a fresh perspective in there, but in a meaningful way. Something that I think a lot of students and parents would like to know. So let's say a student is interested in esports, and we'll say that they don't just kind of casually play single player games. We'll say they have a little bit of talent under their belt. Maybe they're not the best. How would you even suggest them to like kind of start the road of like figuring out what colleges offer, or how to get in touch with their esports programs?
So man, we could talk about this for hours by itself. I'll give some, I think, basic advice to where to start. But first of all, locale matters. Finances matter as much as people, try to forget that they do. Not every school with an esports program will offer a scholarship. A lot of the ones that do, you can find them on some top list somewhere, but I would probably try to do some research. Part of it is a two-way street where we're also ourselves trying to get our name out to make sure we're more accessible to people. But a lot of students, especially, and parents, will go through our emails, maybe even our social media, DM us, kind of, because there's no, again, established paved road for this sort of thing. We don't have a singular first-party combine for every single title that exists. That's not real. So most often people kind of look at their local options, and then contact each of them respectively, take a look at what their offerings are. And unfortunate reality is maybe they don't have like a varsity program, because many don't. They'll have like a club or something instead, or they might be only getting their feet wet. A lot of these things are student run entirely, with no faculty or administration backing it whatsoever. So we personally get inquiries from all over the globe, like not even just North America.
Wow.
We get people from Europe, we get players from Asia.
Right.
We get retired pros or people that maybe like are saying, well, I'm done kind of chasing that. I want to get an education now, but I still want
Right.
to, provide myself with some stability through scholarship or what have you. So the net we cast is wide.
Right.
Pretty much anyone can apply, but as a student, these are the things you have to have ready. You're going to need, obviously, you're going to have to apply to the school, your UC application
Right.
or whatever, what have you. We can help with the formal recruitment process if you are absolute elite all-star.
Right.
But even then, if you are, the faker of League of Legends, the best player in the world, but you have like a 2.0 GPA, it's going to be hard to justify your mission.
Right.
So,
I mean, well, it's not only just about like finding. It's not just about skill at that point, but like you said, like there's so much of this. Right. And also like, are you going to academically succeed if you bring someone in like that?
Exactly.
And,
yeah. Can you continue all through those 4 or 5 years? It's a commitment.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's what we talk about a lot too sometimes with students is like on the admission side, like a lot of times students will get denied because maybe their academics aren't up to snuff, and it's if an admission officer is doing their job in, good faith and good heart, then like they're not really looking to crush your dreams in that way. It's a fact that like we've seen students with these academic ranges come in here before and they struggle, fail, drop out, and then you have lost time, money, energy, emotional power. It's just such a huge investment for families that like we don't want to put students in that route. So same thing here, right? Where it's not just about the fit of esports, but it's also about that fit of culture. Like, can you make it at that school? You don't have to be the valedictorian, but can you get that degree that is kind of the goal at the end of the day?
Yeah, know where you're going, have that conversation with whoever you might need to, your counselor, your advisors, maybe contact the school you're looking to get into.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes, again, you're going to have to be brutally honest. We talk to recruits every single year, all-star players. We are fortunate enough to kind of have that two-way street. We set the net out and we do get the applicants come in. Yeah, a lot of people would be great, I guess, objectively speaking, as players, but they might not fit exactly the molds we're looking for as a person, a captain, a teammate, and then their grades on top of that.
Right.
It's turbulent, right? So students out there, I would recommend, and parents, before esports, before looking at like, okay, I want to go pro or whatever, like, how are your grades looking? Like, do you take any extracurriculars? Have you ever worked on a resume before? Because you will need to hand in a competitive resume.
Right.
Like an essay to your school can include you talking about video games, turns out nowadays.
Yep.
That's awesome. But it has to be not just about your favorite video game.
Yes.
Yeah, you have to go the extra mile here.
And that's something we talk about too, and that's where we were talking about this earlier, but a blog post on our blog deals with talking about video games. And one of the things that is always crazy to me, and this goes with extracurriculars too, is what I really try and preach to students. Like, think outside the box. Like, sure, student government, awesome. Like, a service club, great. But like, do you work a part-time job? If so, include that. Do you have like familiar responsibilities? Are you taking care of siblings or an older family member? Like, that is equally important. Along with that, I always use the example of when I was in high school, Halo Reach had just come out. And so that was like, everybody was super excited. It was Red Dead Redemption, Halo Reach came out within like a couple months of each other, I think. And so my friend and I were playing Halo Reach. We started playing it ranked a little bit more competitively. And we ended up meeting people that we started like re-seeing, and they started playing custom game nights with us. And we ended up using the Bungie website at the time to create our own little sub-website. And what started as like 3 people ended up jumping into 6 people. And by the time we were done, I was managing like 27 people in like 3 different games. So like we were having StarCraft 2 nights, Red Dead Redemption nights, Halo nights. We even started having movie nights. But like, I only knew one other person in there. It was just me and then 25 strangers that were kind of around our age that ended up becoming this culture. I didn't mention that ever. anything about that in my entire extracurriculars, college essay, nothing. And like now, with the benefit of hindsight, I look back at that and I realize like the sheer capacities, professional capacities, and people skills needed to make that happen, that alone can open doors at a college.
Please put that on a resume. If you are a moderator of a Discord server and you have hundreds of people in there, even dozens of people in there, that's impressive.
Right.
We have opportunities for students, for like student staff, arena positions, internship positions, and whenever we mention esports qualifications preferred or whatever, people are like, oh well, how am I ever supposed to get any of those? You running your own server or community server totally counts. Like if you we have people do like Minecraft servers,
right.
like run those, build things for X many people, kept it active for however many years, like stuff like that totally counts. Getting involved even in like game nights, occasional things on weekends,
right?
They look good.
Yeah, they do. I mean, because that's something that we talk about just on the admission side. Like, sure, extracurriculars can be a way to like brag about how cool you are or like what you're doing, but also like truthfully, it's just for most students in this country, you are going to wake up and go to school from like 8 to 3 or something. Usually, you'll have extracurriculars after. You got to eat meals, hopefully 3 of them throughout the day at some point, and then you got to sleep at least a couple hours. And so when I talk about extracurriculars, I mean, besides school, eating, sleeping, like, what do you do with your time? Like, that's what I care about. Exactly. Who are you? So take us through, if you can, the day in the life of like an esports program at a university. So like, what does it look like? What kind of students are participating? You even mentioned briefly that like you have people who are maybe playing games, but also there are maybe other roles that are available. Just talk about like what would the average like day of like an esports program or an esports like studio look like?
Yeah, the exact day of any given person working within the program will vary depending on your role.
Right.
But I would say looking at it like a kind of like a bird's eye view. Mm-hmm. Doors open for us pretty late. They open noon. Okay. They don't open super early.
Well, that's not too bad.
Yeah, like people, kids got classes and stuff like that, and they have things to attend to early in the morning. So we open a bit later. Mm-hmm. And it turns out by the time all your classes are done, it's a little later as well. Right. That's when people like to play. So we're open, our hours of operation are noon to 8 p.m. But yeah, before that, we have our student staff come in, lights on, make sure all our PCs are working, double check everything's in place, nothing's stolen, everything's fine and dandy.
Right.
Depending on the day, tons of events happening inside, but students will come into our doors, check in at the front desk, use our facilities. They jump in on the community corner sometimes, play some games on the console, some Smash Brothers or what have you. Mm-hmm. Most people hop on the PCs, play their game of choice. We have a large library to pick from. They can play whatever they want. If it's a licensed game, they have to have a license. Right. But yeah, all that good stuff. And then throughout the weeks and the months, things will pop up all the time. Sometimes we have like costume contests. Right. Sometimes we'll have like newbie nights. For Valentine's Day, we said if you came in with your partner, you got like the day free. So tons of things like that. We have guest speakers come in.
Build that community and culture, right?
Right. It's not just you sit down at the desk and you tune out. Some people can. Some people just, you had a hard final.
Right.
You studied. Now it's time to relax and just escape for a couple of hours. Uh-huh. That happens all the time. But people come in and like do their homework. People come in just to like vibe, talk to their friends, like just as they would maybe over lunch. Well, they do this over games. You're kind of multitasking.
I think that's something that's really interesting that doesn't get talked about quite as much. And I know parents aren't thinking about it this way, but it is almost like to use maybe an older term, maybe not as widespread, but like a student union, so to speak. Like for people who
share
that hub, like for that culture where like if you're going to hang out with friends, it can be a way of self-care. Like you said, maybe you had a tough day, maybe you studied for your final. Like now you've done your student part of things, you're going to enjoy something. Maybe you're hanging out with friends. Especially the community events. I don't think many people really imagine that when they think about like, even if they know what esports is, like they don't think about it as like that community event. They very much think about it kind of like you described, like huge headset on, crunched over, like clicking away at a computer is what most people envision. So that's really interesting and cool, and something that as we go through this interview series, I hope we find that at more schools, but it certainly is refreshing to at least hear of it at one.
Yeah. I think that's a thing I want to hit on is like parents, we have coming in with their kids all the time to
Right.
tour the facility, talk to me or anyone else, like either virtually or in person. And they always leave with the impression that, oh, I had no clue like this was kind of how it worked. I thought people would come in, sit at a desk and, munch away with a Doritos dust on their
Yeah,
fingers and not do.
exactly.
It's not like that whatsoever. It's way more communal and there's a lot of fraternizing. It's the stereotype of the
Mhm.
gamer still is still prevalent. But what we try to do almost the most here is break that association,
Right.
that stigma almost. And on campus, it's successful. But kind of expanding that outside our community has always been a challenge still, although
Right.
times are changing.
I love that because it's the same thing, and it's one of those things where growing up, and I grew up in southern Alabama, and that is football territory.
Oh
And
yeah.
I even half my family was Alabama, half my family was Auburn. Like when they would play their match, I think this shows how much I know about football. I think around Thanksgiving, like we had to separate to different sides of the home, and like I think because of that, I never got into like sports, like traditional sports, and so it was one of those things where. I always had to really act as almost like that ambassador for the
You're an
video
intermediary.
yeah, the video game side of things, where people would be like, I just don't get it. Like you sit there and you watch some people play a video game. I'm like, you're sitting there watching grown men play a game. Like,
It sounds a little familiar,
yeah,
right?
it's not too radically different. There's a lot of overlap if you're willing to be open minded to it.
Right.
That's so. Speaking of being an ambassador and kind of that middleman between, or middle person between, maybe people who are familiar with esports and people who aren't familiar with esports. I have a couple questions I'm going to ask, and they're going to be based off of searching through data and trends and Google Trends, kind of the most popular questions that pop up. And some of them we've already talked about, so I'm going to leave those off. But for a couple of them, I do want to hear just like your rapid fire responses. And to start off with the very first one, for those of you who have been listening and are sitting there and asking your question, the number one most popular one, what is an esport? What is an esport in your own words?
So quick lesson. It's just like how you would search email or write email,
Uh-huh.
no hyphen, don't capitalize
Yeah.
anything. It's just all lowercase, unless you're using it to start a sentence.
Right.
But yeah, esports. You'll hear I think a little bit of back and forth here on this, but generally you can think about it like electronic mail, electronic sports. The sports could be something you're more familiar with. It could be FIFA or the latest Madden or NBA game. We could also kind of move out of maybe your more traditional sense of the word sport and get into kind of like a shooter.
Right.
You can think about it more like maybe paintball, right? Or airsoft. Or you can get into like kind of more strategic games or card games. And then you're thinking about comparatively maybe something like poker or
Right.
darts. The difference is the medium and the way in which the game is played. Instead of
Right.
physical, it will be digital.
Yes.
But for all intents and purposes, very comparable, the two sports, esports.
Right. It is always interesting trying to define a sports, a game, like a gaming genre to people who don't know. I was trying to explain MOBAs to someone recently, and I was like, it's kind of like chess in the sense that every piece is on the opposite side, and they all have different unique abilities, but there's only 5 of them, and a different person is controlling each piece, and like halfway through I was looking at them and I was like, oh man, we are running on fumes here. There's no, like, conceptually they
Like-
cannot grasp it.
I like to use soccer,
Uh-huh.
and then I asked them, "Have you seen like Mario Super
Yeah.
Strikers or whatever?"
Uh-huh.
Like it's like, yeah, but you ultimately the goal is the same: just destroy the other people's base and or get a goal.
Yeah,
just,
it's
in
getting a
In
point.
MOBAs, it's first to one.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And like everyone plays a part, plays a different role. You meet in the middle, and try to get to the other side.
Right.
And even when I'm talking to my own parents, and they are wondering about the games I'm playing, I always have to bring it back to like a sport that they're familiar with as like an analogy.
Right.
And that usually works out fine. Whether or not they're like, oh, okay, is it valid, or like
Right.
is that composition as good as this? Like there's always going to be back and forth on that. Pick your poison kind of thing.
Yeah.
But but they've come around to the point where they're like, okay, yes, I get it.
That's what
You're
I was
playing a
actually
game,
going
it's a
to
competition.
ask, because I know that's something that a lot of parents deal with, but also a lot of students are scared of. Like, how are your
Yeah, how's
parents?
my mom or dad gonna take this? Right?
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Yeah,
how were
yeah.
your parents during your journey? And of course, your parents are not everybody's parents, but like, I think the story, truthfully, would probably reassure some people out there just hearing like how things went.
Yeah. So I'm especially working in collegiate, like you get a whole spectrum. Sometimes you have the super supportive parents that'll, support whatever their kid wants to do no matter what.
Right.
And then sometimes you have the ones that are very stern or kind of,
Maybe
vehemently, okay, you
skeptical.
have to do this way. Yes. Or like you shouldn't do this. I was coming in the middle where my parents they were disapproving at first, but after becoming better educated, they became a little bit more lenient.
Right.
And only after did they start seeing kind of more news about it, the success, the checks.
Yeah.
When money gets involved, it becomes, okay, we'll do it, whatever.
Right.
But yeah, like we started bringing home like prizing and peripherals, small stuff at 1st, and soon they changed their tune.
Right.
It's unfortunate that like it has to come with like monetary gain in a way for approval. But I also do think that's changing in time.
Yeah.
A lot of parents that do come in because their kids are like, I really want to go here for the arena or something. And once the parents come in, they realize, oh yeah, no, it's just like I understand more. They have friends here. It's not just they're playing for money or even gambling. Some parents think they're gambling, or like they're like obsessed with like Fortnite, for example.
Right.
Right. And they're like, oh, my kid's just going to play Fortnite all the time. And they're like, no, like I can meet friends here. I can expand my horizons.
Right.
It's right by the eatery. I'll have a meal. I won't starve to death.
Right. And a thought off of that, it's kind of interesting, is honestly, I wish more people would approach actual athletics, or I say, ooh, that's probably a bad phrasing, actual athletics. We'll say more traditional athletics, with that sense of maybe skepticism, because there are the same kind of limitations we find in regular athletics, where you have students who maybe are pretty good at the game, they understand it, we'll use soccer, great at soccer, but like they're not going to go to a D1 school, they're not going to get a scholarship, they're not going to play professionally, and like I think that if parents approach from that same perspective, where it's not about having like a jersey with like framed somewhere in a Hall of Fame, but it can be about growing, it can be about finding your people, it can be about learning other capacities aside from the game, teamwork, communication, confidence, those kinds of things. Honestly, I think we'd have a generally healthier athletic collegiate environment in general.
And it's going to be like that for 99.9% of people.
Right.
Like sorry, kids out there, like it's a numbers game.
Yeah.
Right. Like and I'm not out here to be the dream crusher. You should always push as hard as you can and like make it so you get whatever experience you're looking out of this without regret.
Right.
But parents out there, like if you're listening, it's okay if your kid doesn't become that superstar. I promise you, if they're sent to a good school with a good program, their first focus will not be to make your child, like a amazing D1 athlete that makes it to the NBA or whatever, right? Like they will make sure like your kid gets good grades. They'll make sure your kid is not a recluse, that they have a good work-life balance between academics and social lives and whatnot, what have you.
Right. And the other thing I thought of, and once again, I have a feeling maybe we'll come back and we'll have another session about some of these topics, because there are topics that I would find fascinating to discuss. But even just thinking about something you mentioned, right, that like there's an age difference, it's kind of strange, because even though we are young, like we're getting to the point where people who maybe grew up with like 80s arcades and like competing to get a high score, or even like the early kind of 90s like home console kind of thing, they are starting to have children that are getting to be like college age, as crazy as that sounds.
Yeah.
And so like it will be interesting to see over time, like as more and more adults maybe had these aspects in their childhood or are more familiar with them, like will we see maybe like more parent buy-in, maybe less parent obstacles, or even like parents that want to get more involved in these kinds of programs.
We're already seeing that.
Okay.
I can say that with guarantee and certainty. Like, and that's fantastic. And I wouldn't say it's like on the way. I think it's actually already here. You will always have your outliers, I think, but depending on where you live, probably a little bit. Like every parent I've spoken to ever has been receptive,
Right.
At the very least, if not maybe excited.
Yeah.
So that's great. I hope it continues to be that way.
Right.
That's not to say that they're like super gung ho and they're like, oh, I have to get my kid to the school,
Mhm.
but they're at least open minded and willing to hear everything we have to say,
Right. And
which is the only thing we really ask.
yeah, that's the first step. Heading back to some of the popular questions, because we've gone a little bit over, but we'll try and be conscious of time. One of the things that I found interesting when I was looking at Google Trends is there are a lot of trends to what is like the most popular esport, right?
Oh.
And for somebody, I think, who has been familiar with esports for a while, we know that changes, right? It ebbs and flows. Sometimes we have things that they're good, true, they've stayed around for a long time. I'm thinking of like a lot of fighting games, for example. Like sometimes you'll even have the fighting game community reject a new edition in favor of older one. Like Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is still floating around there, despite the fact that it's very old.
Smash Bros. Melee.
Yeah, Smash Bros. Melee. And then on other ways, we have some things that like burn super bright, and maybe less so in esports, but certainly in the streaming community, you have things where like they will
flavor of the month kind of thing.
Right, explode overnight, and then like they just disappear in a month. So just based off of kind of like, let's say right now in the setting of esports, what are some of the most popular esports that like you and your students might work with, and are there any like up and coming ones that you might think are interesting, or maybe you want to see in the future a little bit more?
That's a great, well-timed question. So even at UCI Esports, we're always keeping an eye on market for these sort of things. Like you said, like video games are a super brand new thing, and no game has stood the test of time of 30 years plus. Yeah. Right. Unless you count like chess as like an esport, right? That's been around for thousands of years. But yeah, like me and other directors or people running programs have had this discussion of what it's like to sunset a title, like when it comes time, especially if it's a scholarship title. Like, do you let's say you promised a kid to come to a school for 4 years, they play 2 years, and then the title dies. Right. Well, do you pay out the rest of the 2 years or like remaining, or like what's the deal? Yeah. So it's an intricate process and a very interesting discussion. Though we probably don't have time. Right. I would say, to answer the question directly, what's the most popular? There's like a big 3 or 4 that are always around and have been around since I've been part of things. League of Legends, over a decade old, and only getting better. Right. Expanding. That IP is booming. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy that we have off branches coming out now. Or for those of you, like a Netflix series. Yeah, IP is king. That and like crazy. League of Legends is the video game poster boy for how to run it. And along the same vein as Riot, like new titles, the RSAA, or the Riot Scholastic Gamers Association, they announced that fall 2022, coming this September, will be the first collegiate first-party run circuit for students. And like we're trying to get involved. A bunch of people are trying to get involved. Valorant is massively popular and run by the coveted Riot Games. So people are looking to get into that. Yeah. Most, not all, but a lot of colleges or universities that do have scholarship programs prefer to compete in titles that are first party specifically, because you get kind of the idea that the reliability that, well, a developer won't just let their game die. Yeah, it's not going to be a flavor of the month. They won't just leave. Exactly. They're committed because, well, money is it's their cash cow. They got to keep it going. So we have a really cool case with Activision Blizzard. Like they used to do Heroes of the Storm, and that game kind of faded into obscurity because it directly competed with League of Legends. And schools have had to sunset that. So Overwatch, which is one of the big collegiate titles they're still playing, we compete in it, other schools do too, is about to get its sequel, in Overwatch 2. So sometimes there's a revival of things as well, and it's really hard to know. Like if you're trying to tell your kid, okay, compete in this, it'll be around, and you don't have a problem. I'm sorry, mom, dad, there is none. Yeah. There really is none. But the good thing is, the tools of the trade will remain the same. Right. hopefully maybe 30 years from now you're playing with a VR headset. I don't know. But and the skills and the lessons and the concepts you learn do carry over a lot of the time.
Right.
You know, like you have your, you know, like tactical positioning, you got aims and mechanics that carry through and around, right? You have ideas of playing with numbers, like allocating resources.
Game knowledge, just general being able to synthesize and look at the alternatives when you're presented with a couple different pieces.
Right. So I would say League of Legends, Valorant, Overwatch, Rocket League, maybe Call of Duty are like the big five right now. And then that changes like every year. Not every year, but every few years. Yeah. So it gives us an excuse to have more of these interviews.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll have to check in every now and then. So one other one before we get to our last question that I found really interesting. So one of the cool things you can do when you look through search data is you can see where searches are originating from. So you can kind of like heat map it. And for those familiar with like video games and kind of video game culture right now, especially with streamers, we know that there are like hubs where streamers live because there's almost a community that forms around that. So like typically we think California, we think maybe Pacific Northwest, maybe Seattle, Austin kind of big and booming right now. One of the things that I found really interesting, I'm gonna have to look at the notes here, 3 states were above and beyond like the most popular locations, and I want to get your throwing the dart in the dark kind of guess. Texas, North Carolina, and New Jersey were the 3 most popular places where these search originated from. I think obviously we can think of like Texas
makes total sense.
A lot of like blood moving in there, kind of a new Silicon Valley forming, Austin becoming a hub. Any idea about North Carolina or New Jersey?
I wish I knew. I would say like if are the searches just like esports general?
Yeah, they're generally esports, just like kind of like looking for all of these varieties of questions.
That's very interesting. I have no idea. I think, well, we know that they have like big universities and other places competing. Maybe it's one of the, if I had to guess, kind of like a program props itself up and there's like a surge of interest. But if you're looking at long-term data, I have a suspicion you'll probably see this at a lot of places where there's like a news article or something comes out and there's a spike,
and then there's a spike.
And it goes down, and it goes like that.
Or we have maybe like a university starting a program, right? And then they maybe they go on the marketing trail and they start throwing flyers out, kissing babies, and like all of a sudden people in that area are starting to wonder like, what does this even mean? I thought that was interesting because my same thing. I thought Texas, totally understand it. North Carolina and New Jersey, never would have put them on the top of these search lists.
Yeah, me neither.
So really interesting. The last question I'm going to throw out here, and then we'll do some closing remarks. One of the most popular searches, and this is definitely a divisive topic, are esports real sports? That is something that I think is changing a lot now. And like you said, I think truthfully, like the money and the culture, the fact that there's somebody who can go online and not even be part of a team, but just stream video games online and get paid pretty handsomely depending on where they fall in the hierarchy. I think that's added a lot of legitimacy to it. But like, in short, what would you say to someone who's asking the question, like, are esports real sports?
I would say that depends on what's core to your definition. For some people, like the benchmark is in the dollars. For some people, the benchmark is in the medium, the tool you're using. Like maybe it has to be, maybe sports for them is very strictly tied to physicality. In which case, they would never agree that esports is a sport. But maybe if what's core to your definition of a sport is like high level competition of like maybe like a game of some sort, right? Then they would totally. So for me, like some people don't think chess is a sport, and that's okay, right? Like, and then that's kind of where they sit on the line of the definition. For anyone, and I think everyone in esports is of this mindset. Anyone that uses the term will be. It's just like elite, high level competition, like top of the world. Like you, if you are watching esports, and this is actually very interesting. I've learned fairly recently that most people that watch esports don't watch it to be entertained, but they watch it to learn and improve. Which is actually directly opposed to people that watch regular sports. They think they know it all. They watch to be entertained. but there's like a unique facet of esports that the audience, on top of it being entertaining, are watching to better themselves. And I think if your definition of like what is a sport is precisely that, being good at something, esports is almost more of a sport than sports. Put pitchforks away. I know. It might be
I can hear the torches walking down the street right now.
Yes. I will concede without a doubt it requires less physicality. Right. But even within typical esports org and stuff, and our own program as well, we have a sports physiologist.
Right.
A healthy mind is a healthy body.
Exactly.
So again, moving away from the stereotype, we aren't all couch potatoes, although I do enjoy a bag of Lay's on the weekend.
Yeah.
Like we try to stay fit. Like we have a dietitian. We make sure we watch what we eat. We make sure we walk around between games. We have led stretches and stuff. We do our weights, our lifting. Yeah, like it's the Venn diagram, and most people don't just sit in one bubble or another. And I think the Venn diagram is closer together. Like the middle section is larger than you might think.
Right, exactly. And I think that even just based on our conversation, it's growing, right? That it is merging.
It's only getting closer.
And even when we see things like, I can't remember what it was, but several years ago, I know ESPN like hosted, I can't remember what they hosted. Maybe it would have been a League of Legends.
I think they did League of Legends. I know Disney XD had Overwatch on.
Right. And it's one of those things where, like, when I see that, it's always interesting because I know there's a whole demographic there that's starting to see things. And it is funny. I'll use a quick anecdote. One of my previous relationships, I was watching Twitch, and it was when, I guess it was PUBG was big. Maybe PUBG.
Yeah, like anyway. 5 years ago.
Yeah, like it was a battle royale shooter. And he walked in and saw me watching it, and like I was getting ready for the whole like any teenager or adult who like likes video games, or I'll throw anime in there because this happens a lot with anime. Like when an adult walks in, you're kind of like, yeah, that's what I'm doing. Like you're not gonna care, you're not gonna understand. Like go do your thing, whatever. And I remember he sat down and he was fascinated because once I started explaining the fact that like there was a circle that was coming in, that you had to set up positions, and he was like, well, how do they know where they are? And I'm like, well, it's the sounds in the game. Like you could tell directionally like where the gunshots are coming from. And he was like, this is amazing. And my girlfriend at the time walked in, and he was like, have you seen this? Do you know this is a thing? Like they can hear where the gunshots are coming from. and it made me super happy because I was like, this is great. Like we should watch some more esports all the time.
Like a simulation of the Hunger Games. And he was like, I would love to partake.
That's exactly what it is. Like when you connect it to that. Awesome. So we've already gone over, but let's start closing it down. So one thing I would say is it's always weird with final thoughts. We'll talk about like where can we find, the social media blitz and all that. And for those watching, I actually have a banner on the bottom of the screen which has all of our social media. Not specifically Renanthra's, but the UCI program. I'd certainly love for you to give yourself a shout out too. But closing thoughts, like if you could talk to parents and students right now directly. Let's just say you had the whole world watching and they're all interested in esports. What advice would you give them as like a family unit to like kind of navigate this world, especially when it relates to like college and collegiate esports?
Ooh, that's a lot of pressure.
I know. It doesn't have to be your best advice. It just has to be
Give me a deep
sound.
one for the last one, Sawyer. I want fair.
Throw a sucker punch in there.
I'm gonna lean in here and say, UCI Esports has 5 pillars, and I think not just us, but every college esports program will have some variety of these things. And even if they're not their prime ones, they're not the directive ones, they will still care.
Right.
That I'll say that with confidence. Our 5 are competition, academics and research, community, entertainment, and careers. Mm-hmm. And every single thing we do for our students is in relation to one of those things, if not more than one of those things.
Right.
If you're coming here to become a player, we care about competition. If you are going to a school, you need to get good grades.
Right.
If you come here, you're going to be part of our community. You'll be welcome here. Entertainment, esports lives and dies by its fans. It does not exist unless people are watching.
Right.
We play service of that. We have our streams. They'll run production, and great segue into careers. It's not just about playing professionally. It's not just about being the next big streamer either. You can marry your skills in all sorts of ways and in service of your passion with video games. You could go into graphic design. You could go into like management, project management, sponsorships, partnerships. You can do social media, right? You can do video content. You could coach. You can like do all sorts of things. The world is yours. You could design games yourself, work in the back end. Like it's so varied, no matter if you're a science kid or like humanities kid or a math kid. Truly, like the horizon is beyond what we can see. And esports is beautiful. We all love it because we're at the cusp of its beginning. It's only going to get bigger. It's only going to become more popular and more refined. I think it's a good time to kind of sit down, talk to your kid. If not to get involved with esports specifically, just to get to know them better. Like I'm sure they'll be excited and appreciative that you're taking an interest in what they care about.
Very sound advice. I couldn't have said so better myself, and I will add a special gold star to the idea of creating and video game culture. Video game companies are, in my opinion, the best example of interdisciplinary connections you could possibly fathom. Music, sports, marketing, legal, HR, like leadership, organization, art, animation, computer design, like marketing. It just all comes together in like these really beautiful symphony of like, I don't know, like obviously we're both passionate about it, but it is something that I find remarkable that like you could take any passion or skill and you could apply it to the gaming world and industry if it was something you truly cared about.
There will be a place for you without doubt somewhere.
Somewhere, exactly. Awesome. Well, Ronald, it has been phenomenal having you on. I have loved our conversation. It's been a joy, and I don't say that term lightly. Tell us where we can find you specifically, because we have all of the UCI esports different social medias on the screen right now, but where can we find more of you if we wanted to learn a little bit more about you or see what your thoughts are or hear where you're going in life?
Okay, fantastic. Hi, everyone out there. Renanthra here. Ren for short. Renanthra is too long. You don't have to say it. It's okay. Also, Ron for short. Ron or Ren. Pick your favorite vowel. On Twitter, Renanthra. On Instagram, Ronanthra. Someone took Renanthra. I'm very upset. Very not.
If you're watching this, give it back to him. Okay?
Give it back. Those are the two places I'm on the most. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I get tons of questions from parents on LinkedIn. I answer as much as I can. You can find me on LinkedIn also at /Renanthra, or just look up my name, Ronald Ly, where I hope Sawyer has my name somewhere there.
Yes.
But yes, I would love to talk to everyone that wants to talk more about either UCI specifically or esports generally. I'll try my best to answer as many people as I can. But that's me. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And you can see all of virtual college counselor stuff. We're pretty lucky that most things we end up as virtual college counselors. We didn't have anybody steal our particular title, although it is a mouthful. And you can visit our website for more information on how we work with students doing college advising, high school prep, academic advising, things like that. Likewise, if you have questions that you want to send them to me as well, because I can pocket them and we can do a whole nother Q&A later that involves all the questions we get. And that would be amazing, because really, as much as we love talking about this stuff, this is for students and families and other professionals out there that want to know more about it. So if you are a college professional, high school professional, if you are a family student, anything in between, and you want more information, if you're a professional and you want to give your 2 cents, feel free to reach out to me, and I would love to set something up with you. But otherwise, we appreciate you showing up. We appreciate you watching. More information can be found at all the links in the descriptions below. Do all those classic, like, subscribe, share, whatever you want to call it. But we appreciate you showing up, and hopefully we will see you next time whenever we meet again in the future. Awesome. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Recording stopped.